My girlfriend won't stop comparing herself to an old friend with benefits of mine, and now it feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy that I'll leave her because she thinks she's not good enough. Posted by _throwaway. I'm 26, and my girlfriend Melissa, 26, and I have been navigating the waters of love for just under 2 years. Our romance blossomed in the ivory towers of academia, where we're both pursuing our PhDs in different STEM fields at one of the nation's most prestigious universities. While this marks my first serious relationship, the chemistry between us was electric from the moment we met, like two elements destined to bond. We've painted beautiful pictures of our future together, sharing a home, adopting pets. She wants a cat, I'm more of a dog person, but we've agreed we could have both, and building a life that would make any couple envious. The topic of marriage has floated through our conversations like a gentle breeze, with Melissa leaving breadcrumbs of hints about wedding bells and forever promises. I can see that future clearly in my mind's eye, us growing old together, supporting each other through life's challenges, celebrating each other's victories. But I've been cautious about making such monumental commitments while still immersed in the demanding world of academic research. My priority has been laying a solid foundation that could support both our dreams and ambitions. When I expressed these thoughts, I witnessed the first hairline crack in Melissa's confident facade, a subtle flinch, a momentary dimming of her usually bright eyes. She took my hesitation harder than I expected, though we managed to paper over that crack and move forward. Or so I thought. That was our only significant hurdle until fate, with its cruel sense of irony, decided to throw Natalia back into my life like a wrench in perfectly functioning machinery. The history between Natalia and me is complicated, the kind of complexity that only undergraduate years can produce. We studied the same branch of biology, coincidentally, the same field Melissa is in now, and became inseparable members of various science clubs and our professional fraternity. Our connection was instant and electric, like two complementary strands of DNA finding each other in a vast cellular soup. We shared not just academic interests, but a deep understanding of each other that made us natural companions, finishing each other's sentences and communicating through mere glances across crowded rooms. We spent countless weekends together, lost in conversations about everything from molecular biology to our dreams of changing the world through science, and were each other's automatic choices for formal events. Despite the palpable attraction that crackled between us and eventually led to intimate moments, we never officially crossed the threshold into dating. Looking back, it seems absurdly juvenile how we danced around our feelings, like two electrons orbiting each other but never forming a bond. We were essentially friends with benefits for 2 years, but there was always an unspoken understanding that our paths would diverge after graduation, like two reaction products separating in a solution. I was finishing my degree first, and she had ambitious plans to conduct groundbreaking research abroad before returning to the States for her PhD. We would joke about reuniting at our dream graduate school, the same way people joke about winning the lottery, a pleasant fantasy that makes you smile but you never really expect to come true. When I graduated, we drifted apart naturally, like two molecules following their separate concentration gradients. The geographical distance and our increasingly busy lives made maintaining contact difficult, and eventually, our communication faded away without drama or hard feelings, like a reaction reaching its natural endpoint. That was almost 5 years ago. Before Melissa illuminated my life with her presence, I occasionally found myself wondering about what could have been with Natalia. Those late-night, what-if scenarios that play in your mind when you're alone with your thoughts. But those musings vanished completely once I found happiness with Melissa, like old data being overwritten by new, more relevant information. Or at least, they did until last year, when the past came knocking at our door in the most unexpected and explosive way possible. The revelation of Natalia's return to my life came through Melissa's tears, like a plot twist in a story I thought had long since ended. She arrived at my apartment one evening, her usual confident demeanor shattered like a dropped beaker. Through her sobs, she explained how her professor had crushed her hopes of joining a prestigious research expedition to South America, a dream she had nurtured since starting her PhD. The position, she explained between hiccuping breaths, had been given to a new graduate student who possessed what seemed like an impossibly perfect combination of qualifications. Intimate familiarity with the target species, established connections with the collaborating South American university, and native-level fluency in Spanish. Over the following weeks, I watched helplessly as Melissa's professional disappointment metamorphosed into an obsession with this mysterious new student. She would come home with stories that seemed to physically pain her to tell. How everyone in the department was captivated by this newcomer's brilliant mind, her worldly experiences, her magnetic personality that drew people in like moths to a flame. It was like watching a time-lapse video of erosion as Melissa's self-esteem crumbled away. Each new story another wave wearing away at her confidence. "You don't understand," she would say, her voice trembling like a leaf in an autumn wind. "She's everything I'm not, brilliant beyond measure, worldly in ways I can only dream of, stunning in every possible way. Natalia is absolute perfection." The moment that name left her lips, my blood turned to ice in my veins. Somehow, I knew instantly that my past had caught up with me in the most ironic way possible, like a boomerang I had thrown years ago finally completing its arc and returning with devastating precision. I tried to suppress my curiosity about Natalia, but fate had other plans, like a scientist trying to ignore an anomalous data point that keeps demanding attention. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced on the sidewalk, I spotted her at my usual campus cafe. The years had been kind to her. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the world's challenges and emerged stronger. We spent 90 minutes catching up, our conversation flowing as naturally as a well-calibrated experiment, picking up threads of discussion as if the 5-year gap had been merely a weekend. She spoke passionately about her research abroad, her eyes lighting up like a student seeing a successful result for the first time, and I found myself genuinely proud of all she had accomplished. When I mentioned having a girlfriend in her department, Natalia's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm, untainted by any hint of jealousy or regret. "We should all get together sometime," she suggested warmly, her smile reaching her eyes. "I'm still finding my way around town." Her sincerity was as clear as purified water, and I could tell any romantic feelings we once shared had evolved into something purely platonic, like a chemical reaction reaching its final, stable state. That evening, determined to handle the situation with complete transparency, I decided to be honest with Melissa. I told her about running into Natalia, explaining that she was an old friend from college. Wanting to prevent any potential insecurities from taking root, I suggested we all have lunch together. In my naive optimism, I thought they might actually get along, united by their shared passion for biology and scientific discovery. Melissa's reaction was immediate and intense, like a violent chemical reaction when two incompatible substances meet. The color drained from her face, as if someone had opened a valve, leaving her pale as laboratory paper. She bombarded me with questions about my history with Natalia, each one more pointed than the last. When I admitted that we had been intimate but never dated, she left my apartment without another word, claiming she needed space to process this information. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through my empty apartment. From that moment, our relationship began to unravel like a DNA helix being torn apart by a helicase enzyme. Melissa's questions became increasingly desperate and specific, each one carrying more weight than the last. "Am I smart enough for you?" she would ask, her voice barely above a whisper, like a hypothesis too fragile to speak aloud. "Natalia went to an Ivy League school, and I went to State University. She's beaten me twice now, hasn't she?" Each comparison was another nail in the coffin of her self-esteem. The physical comparisons were even more heartbreaking, like watching someone dissect their own self-worth under a microscope. Melissa began scrutinizing every aspect of her appearance with the precision of a scientist analyzing data. Her pale skin that burned easily under the summer sun, her short hair that never seemed to style right, the way clothes fit her body as if they were made for someone else. "I wish I had Natalia's exotic looks," she would say, staring at herself in the mirror with growing disgust, as if she were examining a failed experiment. "How does she stay so perfectly thin? It's like she's genetically engineered for perfection." I would shower her with compliments, trying to counteract her negative self-talk like a buffer solution maintaining pH, emphasizing how beautiful and brilliant I found her. But my words seemed to bounce off an invisible wall of self-doubt, like light reflecting off a mirror without ever penetrating the surface. Our intimate moments became increasingly rare as Melissa withdrew into herself, claiming she felt too unattractive or inadequate, as if she were a specimen that had failed quality control. To my horror, I discovered she had been obsessively following Natalia's social media accounts, spending hours scrolling through photos and professional achievements like a researcher poring over a competitor's published papers. It was like watching someone slowly poison themselves while being powerless to stop it, like a culture slowly dying from contamination. My friendship with Natalia became necessarily limited, just brief encounters at the cafe twice a week, nothing more than the minimal interaction required for professional courtesy. We occasionally exchanged texts about meeting there, but that was the extent of our interaction, like two elements carefully kept separate to prevent any reaction. When Melissa would join us, the atmosphere would become thick with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Her responses to Natalia's friendly attempts at conversation were either icily brief or non-existent, each silence loaded with unspoken accusations. The situation reached its breaking point when Natalia invited us to a comedy show. The same comedian we had seen together in college. A seemingly innocent suggestion that acted like a catalyst for disaster. Melissa's emotional breakdown at the mere suggestion made it clear that I needed to distance myself from Natalia entirely, only interacting when Melissa was present, like a controlled experiment under strict supervision. Some might suggest I should have cut Natalia out of my life completely, excised her like a contaminated sample, but it felt unfair to end a meaningful friendship over unfounded jealousy. We barely saw each other as it was, and she had been nothing but kind and respectful of my relationship, maintaining professional boundaries with the precision of a skilled researcher. The real issue was that Melissa had become a shadow of the vibrant woman I had fallen in love with, like a once flourishing culture now struggling to survive. Her constant need for validation and her retreat into insecurity were pushing me away, like a repulsive force between like-charged particles. I suggested therapy, believing her issues ran deeper than just jealousy of Natalia, like a symptom indicating a more fundamental problem. But she would become defensive, asking if I thought she was broken, like a piece of equipment in need of repair. Then came the day that changed everything, the moment when the experiment of our relationship reached its catastrophic endpoint. I received a Facebook message from my late friend Dan's mother that made my heart constrict like a muscle under too much calcium. She was requesting pictures from our fraternity days, seeking precious memories of her son. As I reached for my cherished photo album, a graduation gift from my mother containing the preserved specimens of my college years, my fingers trembled with an inexplicable premonition. When I opened it, my heart stopped like a cell in arrested development. Several photos had been surgically removed with the precision of a skilled dissector, leaving behind jagged edges where memories should have been, like torn pieces of a vital research paper. My hands trembled like a student holding their first pipette as I flipped through the pages, discovering that 12 photos had been excised from the album. 3 of them included Dan, my friend who had passed away, whose smile was now lost to me like data accidentally deleted from a hard drive. The weight of this violation felt like a physical blow to my chest, like the sudden pressure drop in a vacuum chamber. The evidence was clear, like a Western blot showing an unmistakable protein band, but I needed to confirm my hypothesis. When I confronted Melissa, her initial attempt at feigning ignorance crumbled under observation like a poorly prepared slide. As tears streamed down her face like buffer solution overflowing a gel, she admitted to still having the cutout photos, offering to piece them back together like a researcher trying to reconstruct corrupted data. But some things, once broken, can never be fully restored to their original state. The rage I felt was unlike anything I had experienced before. Not the controlled burn of scientific frustration, but a wild, uncontrollable reaction that threatened to consume everything in its path. These weren't just photos of Natalia. They were irreplaceable data points in the timeline of my life, including precious moments with a friend who had crossed the ultimate event horizon. Melissa's jealousy had crossed a line I never imagined she would cross, like a researcher deliberately contaminating a colleague's samples. Unable to trust myself to speak, fearing my words would be as destructive as concentrated acid, I left her standing there, her apologies echoing in the empty hallway like failed PCR cycles. My phone buzzed constantly with her messages and voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to read or listen to any of them, each notification like another error message in a failed experiment. The exhaustion of constantly reassuring someone who refused to believe in their own worth had finally caught up with me, like the crash after too many sleepless nights in the lab. 10 months have passed since that day, like a long-term experiment finally reaching its observation period. Melissa and I ended our relationship, the final data point in a failed trial, and I gradually rebuilt my friendship with Natalia, like a careful reconstruction of a damaged specimen. She knew about the photo album incident, and initially felt responsible, like an innocent bystander caught in a chemical spill, but I assured her that Melissa's actions were not her fault. Our friendship has grown stronger, like a culture thriving in optimal conditions, and I've found comfort in having her back in my life. However, a disturbing pattern has emerged that threatens to drag us back into the darkness of the past, like a contamination spreading through a perfectly sterile environment. It started subtly, anonymous Facebook profiles sending friend requests to Natalia, accompanied by vitriolic messages that made my skin crawl like bacteria under a microscope. Then came the phone calls, strangers responding to fictional escort advertisements that had been posted with Natalia's photo and contact information, each call like another toxic compound being introduced into her life. I remained oblivious to these events until Natalia's roommate pulled me aside one evening after a game of billiards, like a colleague about to reveal compromised research data. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice heavy with concern, like a PI about to deliver bad news about a grant proposal. She revealed that for the past 3 months, a familiar car had been regularly parked on Natalia's street, Melissa's car, as identifiable as a known protein band on a gel. The revelation came when one of Melissa's classmates spotted it and casually mentioned her presence in the neighborhood, like an unexpected peek in a chromatography reading. The situation escalated further when Natalia's research was sabotaged, like a carefully planned experiment deliberately contaminated. Someone had introduced disease-carrying aphids into the greenhouse with the precision of a targeted gene insertion, contaminating several graduate students' experiments. While her principal investigator attributed it to an undergraduate's carelessness, like dismissing an outlier without proper investigation, the timing and specificity of the damage raised red flags as bright as positive controls. When I confronted Natalia about these incidents, she tried to downplay them, particularly the greenhouse situation, like a researcher trying to minimize the significance of anomalous data. The risk would be too high, she reasoned, her voice betraying a hint of uncertainty like a wavering baseline. Anyone caught doing that would be immediately expelled from the program, like a contaminated sample being autoclaved. But she couldn't hide the fear that had begun to consume her daily life, like a culture slowly being overtaken by a pathogen. She described the constant feeling of being watched, glimpses of Melissa in grocery stores and cafes that she tried to dismiss as paranoia, like random noise in a sensitive measurement. These sightings had become more frequent since we started spending time together again, correlating with our increased interaction like dependent variables in an experiment. The guilt weighs heavily on me, like the pressure of a centrifuge at maximum speed. If I had maintained my distance from Natalia after the breakup, perhaps she wouldn't be experiencing this nightmare, this uncontrolled experiment gone wrong. But I also know that isolating ourselves would mean letting Melissa's toxic behavior control our lives, even now, like allowing a contamination to dictate laboratory protocols. Natalia's roommate, who shares classes with Melissa, has been meticulously documenting every suspicious incident with the precision of a laboratory notebook. She's convinced that the greenhouse sabotage was deliberate, like a carefully planned negative control, but Natalia remains hesitant to make formal accusations without concrete evidence, like a scientist unwilling to publish without sufficient data. The stakes are too high, and the academic community too small for unfounded allegations, like a petri dish where every interaction has consequences. I haven't spoken to Melissa since our breakup, except for a brief, tense exchange when returning her belongings, like the final cleanup after a failed experiment. The thought of confronting her now seems both tempting and dangerous. Would it help or only catalyze further reactions? The most chilling aspect of this situation is its similarity to a psychological thriller, the kind where the protagonist dismisses early warning signs until it's too late, like ignoring contamination indicators in a culture. Natalia's roommate has already started keeping detailed records of every incident, creating a paper trail in case things escalate further, like maintaining a thorough laboratory log for future reference. Campus police have been notified of potential stalking behavior, though without naming names, like filing a preliminary report before confirming results. As I write this, I'm struck by the irony of how Melissa's fear of losing me to Natalia became a self-fulfilling prophecy, like a negative feedback loop amplifying itself. Her obsession didn't just end our relationship. It's now threatening to destroy her own academic future if she's caught, like a chain reaction spiraling out of control. Yet I can't help but wonder if there was something I could have done differently, some variable I could have adjusted to prevent this outcome. For now, all we can do is remain vigilant and hope that these incidents are coincidental or will cease on their own, like waiting for a reaction to reach equilibrium. But the shadow of uncertainty looms large, and I find myself checking my rearview mirror more often, wondering if the next incident will be the one that forces us to take more decisive action, like a critical threshold being reached in an experiment. The commenter's advice rings true. Documentation is our best defense, like maintaining detailed laboratory records. But it's a cold comfort when you're watching someone you care about live in fear, jumping at shadows and second-guessing every strange occurrence, like a researcher who has lost confidence in their results. I just hope we can find a resolution before something irreparable happens to anyone involved, before this experiment in human behavior reaches a point of no return.